So, first and foremost, welcome to the Renting in the Amsterdam Metropolitan Area webinar. My name's Mary. I'm the Operations Officer at Expat Housing Network. For a bit of background on me, I've been working here for just over 2.5 years, and I've lived in Amsterdam for almost 3 years. So as soon as I moved here, I essentially started working at EHN 1 month after I moved here. So this has been my life, and I've very much enjoyed it. I've very much enjoyed helping people like myself find their home and feel at home in Amsterdam. I'm half Welsh, half American. I was born in Brussels and lived in Paris for a while as well. And I then studied in the UK. And then, like I said, I've moved here almost 3 years ago. Hi everyone that's just joined, Mauricio and Quinn. Thanks for joining. All right, here we go. So first, let's go through some content of what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about the type of apartments that might suit your needs, where you might want to live, so the various neighborhoods, the cost of living in Amsterdam, the resources that might help you find the market, that might help you search the market, the main types of contracts that you'll be dealing with here in the Netherlands, and other tips and tricks that we wish we'd known when we first moved to Amsterdam. I'd say 99% or so of the company of EHN is expats. So yeah, we really wish we'd known these tips and tricks when we moved over. So let's first talk about the housing market. Here are some words that you've probably heard describe the housing market as described as. There's that the flats are small, that it's expensive, it's ruthless, it's fast, it's dynamic. Yes, these are all true, but there are ways to maneuver it. So don't worry. It can seem overwhelming if you don't know the workaround, but that's what we're here to help you with. And this is what I'm here that hopefully I can help you with some information going forward as well. So let's first explain why the market is so dynamic. We'll call it dynamic. So if you get the 100% of the houses that are available in Amsterdam, 57% of those are in the regulated sector, which is what I would call social housing, or some might know as social housing. So there is a base rent of 720 euros max per month. And there's also a waiting list of 10 to 14 years. And also on top of that, you need to be a Dutch national. So these are not available to expats, unfortunately, but that takes up 57% of the rental properties in Amsterdam already. And then there's the 43%, which is the free sector. Now, this is where we would be able to rent the property. So the rent is not regulated, and the landlords can charge as much as they choose, but of course it needs to be in line with the market. If they decide to overprice their apartment, of course no one will want to rent that apartment. So therefore, of course, it needs to be in line. Now, from that 43% of houses that are left in the free market, 90% of which are privately owned and inhabited. And then that small section of that 10%, that is what is available for expats to rent. Now, that's why the housing market moves so quickly. Some houses can only be on the market for a day. Sometimes they can be longer, but we have seen houses go within an afternoon. That's why it's ruthless. But like I said, again, there are ways to maneuver around it. So don't let this scare you too much. So again, this is just another visual to kind of talk you through it. So of the 57%, sorry, that's 239,000 homes, sorry, which are on the regulated rental homes. 194,000 are the private sector, and only 19,000 are available for rent. So even though 19,000 is a big number, it's pretty small in comparison. Now we're going to talk about different types of apartments and different types of apartments that might suit your needs. So let's start with the shell apartment. To me, it was the most interesting. When I first moved over here, I had never heard of a shell apartment, and maybe you haven't either. But a shell apartment is, as it's described, a shell. So it doesn't have the floors in. It doesn't have the walls necessarily painted. Sometimes they'll be painted, that's fine, but it also won't have all of the utilities. It'll have, for example, the hookups for you to be able to put in your toilet and things like that, but it is a shell. Now, I had never heard of these when I first moved over here. I found the idea of it quite overwhelming. I still do personally, but the benefits of getting a shell is the rent is significantly cheaper. You can stay there long term most of the time. And also, if you were to have pets, then you would absolutely be accepted in with pets, because there would be nothing for the pets to damage. So the landlord would be far more happy to allow pets into your house. And also the chances of you not getting any of your deposit back are slim to none, and also the deposit will probably be less. So those would be the benefits of getting a shell apartment. To me personally, it kind of, the effort of getting the floor and getting everything ready kind of outweighs that benefit, but of course that is a personal choice for you. The second apartment I'll talk about now is the unfurnished apartment, which you can see in the bottom left of your screen. So as you can see, it's fully fitted with all your utilities. It's got nice floors. All you would need to do is provide your furniture. So your couch, your bed, all of the big furniture. Sometimes the unfurnished apartments will have, they'll call it gestoffeerd, but then that means that it'll have curtains, for example, and kind of have those little details. But most of the time, unfurnished apartments come completely bare, and you also need to fit in your own lighting fixtures. That's most common here. So just be aware that that is something that you will need to look out for most of the time. And we do know of handymen that can help you out if needs be. So that's absolutely fine. And the third type of apartment we'll talk about now is the fully furnished apartment. So as you can see, it's absolutely fully furnished. It's got your tables, your chairs, your sofas, your beds. It often also has crockery and your bed sheets and towels. So all you need to do is move in with your suitcase, and you can essentially start living like an Amsterdamer directly. When me and my partner first moved here, we moved into a fully furnished apartment. We lived there for a year and a half, and I have to say I loved it. It was great, but at the same, it was very convenient as well moving to Amsterdam, to a new city. But it did feel unpersonal. It felt like I was living in an Airbnb a bit, and then I moved on to an unfurnished apartment, which now feels like my own home. So that, again, is personal. That might be something for you to think about as well, depending on how long you wanted to stay in this apartment. Now let's quickly talk about neighbourhoods and the distances from Amsterdam city centre. So this is a map of Amsterdam. And it looks quite far, it looks like everything can be quite far away, but a good thing to note is it's not like London and that you'll have maybe like an hour's commute on the train. It's not like America, where again, you'll have over an hour's commute driving. You can literally get from one side of the city to the other within half hour on a bike. So even though it looks far away, everything is still very close. So we found a lot of clients do try and move closer to the center because they don't want to be outside of the hubbub. But then what we do need to like to remind them is you might be out of the hubbub, but it's still easy to get there. And sometimes that's kind of relaxed them. And then they're like, okay, yeah, maybe we'll move over to Nord, for example, or move over to Wester Park, because it is still close to the center. So that's also just something good to keep in mind. And now we're going to talk about the metropolitan cities surrounding Amsterdam again. So as you can see, they look quite far away, but in reality, the connections to Amsterdam Center are so good that it really doesn't take up much time at all. Now, so for example, Haarlem, we also call it the mini Amsterdam here. It's got all the charm, it's got the beautiful buildings, the canals. It just doesn't have the tourists, which is quite nice sometimes, well, if that's what you're into. And then that is 15 minutes away, and it brings you directly to Amsterdam Center by train. You can also get the bus, that takes about maybe 20-25 minutes, but you can get a 15-minute train directly to Amsterdam Center. Now, Haarlem's recently become very popular, so the prices have gotten a lot higher recently, but it is still cheaper than Amsterdam. Same again with Hoofddorp, looks far away, quite up and coming. So cheaper than Amsterdam, of course, and that is 25 minutes to Amsterdam city centre. Amstelveen, now you'll see that there are two numbers there. So they're currently building a metro line from Amstelveen to Amsterdam, and when that is completed, I think it's actually meant to be completed this year. I might need to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure it's meant to be completed this year. But then once that has been completed, it'll be 20 minutes from Amstelveen to the direct centre of Amsterdam. But at the moment, it does take 40 minutes. Hilversum, looking the furthest away, again, only 20 minutes, and again, significantly cheaper than living in Amsterdam, and likewise for Almere, but that's 30 to 40 minutes. So the benefits of living in these metropolitan cities, the main one being its rent is a lot cheaper. And sometimes, depending on the type of house that you like, if you want a big house, then we would recommend moving outside of the city centre. Amsterdam is very busy, so a lot of people live in small apartments, and I mean, you're really paying to live in the city, and I love it. I live in De Pijp, but I'm happy with my nice small apartment because I get to live in the pipe, but it might not be your cup of tea. Now we're going to talk about how much it will cost to live in Amsterdam metropolitan areas. So this is just a comparison. So I know before on the slide I was saying, oh, it's cheaper to live there rather than Amsterdam. Now this is just a reference of how much cheaper it can look. So for a studio, for example, in the city of Amsterdam, we would say that the average price for a studio would be 1,100 to 1,400. Whereas in Hilversum, a studio would be 650 to 900. So already you're seeing a huge gap in price. And then this goes on and on and on. So even a 2-bedroom to 1,600 to 2,400 in Amsterdam, whereas in Hilversum, it's half the price. So again, if you do want to live in Amsterdam, remember you will be paying to live in Amsterdam. It is great, but again, might not be most suitable for you. Additional costs to keep in mind are the deposit. So the general rule here is the deposits are 2 months worth of rent. This can differ occasionally. So sometimes if it were to, for example, be a shell, or if it were to be maybe a smaller apartment, like a pretty small apartment, then they can request only 1 month's rent worth of deposit. And on the flip side, if it's a beautiful luxury apartment, they might even ask for 3 months rent. But we'd say about 80% of the time, it's most common to have 2 months rent deposit. Now this deposit, is kept by the landlord. So unlike the UK, it doesn't have a deposit, you don't have a deposit protection holding scheme, which I thought was a bit uncomfortable when I first came here. But that is the norm. We wish we could change it. It's always nice to have your deposit held somewhere securely rather than in the hands of your landlord. But that is just the way it is here. So don't let that scare you if you find out that the landlord will be holding your deposit. That's just the way it's done. So with this deposit in mind, it's good to know that for you to check into your property, you would need to pay the deposit. So that would be the 2 months rent, we'll say that for argument's sake, as well as the first month's rent on top of that before you can actually check in. So in total, you're going to be paying the value of 3 months worth of rent before checking into your property. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, at the end of your tenancy, if you've left the property as you found it, you should get the 2 months rent the 2 months value of rent back into your account. But that's just something for you to know as well. Now, talking about utilities, this would be the gas, water, and electrics. This is dependent on your usage, of course, so you can somewhat control it, but it's got an average of 100 to 150 euros per month. And then on top of that is the TV and internet. Again, this can vary depending on the subscription and the package that you choose, so it is up to you, but it is between 50 to 100 euros a month. Now, we'd always say, as you can control the cost of your utilities, if you want to keep it down to a minimum, we'd say leave your heating on 19 degrees as an average tops, and don't use too much water, of course. We once had a client who liked to keep her heating on around 25 degrees, and then she contacted us and was like, oh no, why are my utilities so high? And that's when we found out she was keeping her heating on 25. But I mean, to each their own. If she was happy and comfortable, that's fine. And then the third cost that I'll be talking about today is the municipality taxes. Now this pays for waste management, water cleaning, general city taxes, and for a 1-person household, this is 443 euros per year in Amsterdam, and for a 2+ person household is 643 euros per year. So you will be sent a letter annually. It's normally in a blue envelope. And then you have to pay this off, like I said, once a year. You can either pay it off in one lump sum, or if you want to, you can contact the municipality and ask to pay it off in little sections. That's up to you. Now, it's good to know that these prices do vary a little bit depending on the metropolitan cities, but there are only slight differences. So this is just a good number for you to go by. Now I'm going to quickly talk about the resources that might help you search the market if you want to do your own home search. So there are search platforms, so Pararius, which is purely rental, and then there's Funda, which is predominantly for buying properties, but then there are also rental properties on there as well. So feel free to have a browse there, and who knows, maybe you'll actually find one that you want to buy. But you can, of course, find rental properties on Funda as well. Now I'll quickly talk about the corporations and the funds or investors. So these would be Stadgenoot, Rochdale, MVGM. Now these are all big investors who own lots and lots of different properties. So when it comes to these, we do work with them, of course. We can help you find a property with them. If you find a property from MVGM, for example, and you really like it, we can absolutely help, but it's good to know that the process won't be as fast, because since they have so many properties and so many people looking to rent them, it's more done on a lottery basis, rather than if you had a private landlord that you wanted to put an offer in, you'd hand in your offer, well, we'd hand in the offer in the little portfolio, and then they'd be able to choose by a person, whereas when it's a large corporation, it's kind of done more on a lottery basis, so it's more first come, first served. So there's less means to maneuver. Yeah. And now I'll quickly move on to the social platforms, which would be Craigslist, Facebook, and CameraNet. Now these are predominantly used to find rooms if you wanted to go into a house share. You can, of course, find rooms here, but we really would like to stress, make sure that it is legal, make sure you can register. If you can't register at a property, it is not legal, you'll be subletting, and then you'll get into trouble, and it would just not be a nice situation. If you are found out to be subletting and you can't register, then you'll probably be left without a property. But also if you can't register at a property, that means that you wouldn't be able to get onto your company's payroll as well. And so many other things. It's really important to know that you need to be able to register at a property. So if you do find a room on one of these platforms that you'd like to look into, first thing would be to ask, can I register? And does the landlord know that I'm going to be renting this place? If in doubt, please ask to get in contact with the landlord, and just be honest and say, hey, can I rent this place from you? I'm really interested. So it's best to always go directly via the landlord rather than the other tenant, just to make sure you're not subletting. Another thing that I'll talk about now is housing agents. So these ones on our list that you can see here are all ones that we work with very closely and that we trust very well. So there's Relo, there's AHAM, JLG, Coates Macelardij, HB Housing, Neurostate, Interhouse, and Boersma. So they've helped us and helped our clients a lot. We aren't directly affiliated with them, but we just help our clients find lots of houses, and a lot of them have been through these platforms, these housing agents, and we trust them and would recommend them. So you can also go directly to their websites to see their listings, but then if you just wanted a big overview of all the rental houses that are available, head on over to Perarius or Funda. Now, if you are a young professional or a professional moving over and you want to move in with a housemate and you want to make sure that the property is legal to move in with, what we can do is find a flatmate through a hub that EHN has created called Tenant Hub. So what you can do is you can log onto there. It's free to download. It's free to use. You just go on, you can type in your rental requirements, a little bit about yourself, and then you can find other people with the same requirements and match up from there. And then from that point, you guys can actually find a house to move into together as rental flatmates and make sure that it's legal and that you're not subletting. Which brings me on to apartment sharing. So the local law prohibits the sharing of an apartment by more than 2 unrelated adults. So by no means does that mean you can't have a family living together. Of course, they're all related. It's more when you have more than 2 young professionals or 2 professionals living together that are not related, they cannot live there unless the landlord has a specific permit. So this permit costs money to have more than 2 people living in the same property. And that's why lots of landlords would prefer to not get this. So even if you were to get a property with 3 beds, with 3 bedrooms, if the landlord doesn't have a permit, then the 3 people couldn't register. So you need to make sure that you can register as more than 2 people. I'm not saying it's impossible. It is absolutely possible to get a flat share with more than 3 people, but they are harder to come by. So always make sure also that all 3 of you can register before, or 3 or 4, however many you'd like to move in with, can register before signing any contract. Also, a good thing to note is when you're searching for these properties, it will say under the description, possible for 3 or more sharers, or only available for 2 sharers, or no sharers. But you can always read that on the description. It's just something for you to look out for. And now if renting a room in an existing rental, you have to make sure that you can register and that you have the permission to live there from the landlord. So just touching back on that again, just because I want to reinforce that, you do need to make sure that you can register, and you have to make sure that the landlord knows that you're living there as well, just to make sure that you're safe and that you won't be kicked out. That's very important. And then, and quickly going back to Tenant Hub, it is a good way to avoid scams. So like I said, if you were accidentally brought into a subletting situation, if you did want to just find a flatmate and then find a house from there with them, we can help you do that as well. Or you can just find the flatmate and then go on your own way and start searching for yourself as well. That's absolutely fine too. Now I'm going to touch briefly on the main contracts that you'll see in the Netherlands. So the first one is a maximum of 2 years, which is also known as the Model B. So the good thing about this is that you have a notice period of 1 month throughout the entire contract period. So say, for example, you were to move into an apartment and you realized, oh, the street was too loud outside and you wanted to move out, you can give a 1 month's calendar notice from then. So you aren't locked in there. But then you do have a maximum amount of being able to live there for 2 years. What's good to know, though, is even though the contract says you can only stay there for 2 years, the landlord still needs to give you at least 3 months notice before the contract ends. If they don't give you those 3 months notice, then you can technically, the contract will then just turn into rolling. Now, most of the time, the landlord will, of course, give you notice, because he will have wanted, or he or she will have wanted you to only stay there for 2 years. Maybe they were on travels and wanted to come back, but that's just good to know your rights. And now the second type of contract that I'll talk about is the indefinite contract, which is also known as the Model A contract, which is a minimum period of a year. So you cannot leave the property within a year, but then after that, the contract moves on to monthly rolling, and you can stay there for as long as you want. You cannot get evicted unless you really have a big breach of contract. But it is quite hard to get evicted. Like you'd need to stop paying rent or really abuse the house and break the windows or something like that. It is quite hard to be evicted. Not that I recommend you do that, of course, please don't. But after that initial year, you are free to give 1 month's notice whenever you'd like. And like I said, you can stay there for the entirety of your life if you'd like. Something that we can also request during the offer is a diplomatic clause, of course. So the diplomatic clause would then cover you if you were to lose your job under any circumstances, or if your job were to relocate you 50 kilometers away, then that would cover you and you would be able to break the lease. So that's something that can be negotiated. Of course, it's not guaranteed by the landlord. It's not guaranteed, sorry, but if the landlord or the agent accepts it, then it's always something we can ask. Here are some other things for you to consider as well. Are you a smoker? It is absolutely illegal to smoke inside a building in the Netherlands, well, inside a rental property in the Netherlands. So if you are a smoker, or if you have a party, whenever we're allowed to have parties again, and you have friends who like to smoke, then you will need to, well, we would recommend you get a balcony or a slight outside space, unless you don't mind going out for a walk as well. But it's just really good to know you cannot smoke inside, and the smell will stick, and then you will lose some of your deposit because they'll need to repaint the walls. And they are quite strict on that here. A second one to think about is if you've got pets. Now, when it comes to renting with pets, it is absolutely possible. I myself have a cat and I'm renting, but landlords will be a lot more happy to rent an apartment to you if it's unfurnished, or if it's a shell, of course, simply because there's no risk of ruining any furniture. But that being said, in an unfurnished apartment, landlords still can say no to having pets. It is, of course, their choice. But then on the flip side, on a furnished apartment, you might have some landlords that are open to pets. But it is just more common to have an unfurnished apartment being allowed to have pets. Another thing we'd say is, obviously, the more pets you have, the harder it is to find a house. The less desirable you are as a tenant, unfortunately. So we'd say a dog is fine, a cat, 2 cats maybe, but we'd say more than 2 animals, that's when things get difficult. But having said that, we did have a client who had 2 cats and 3 dogs, and we managed to find them a nice place. So it is possible, but it was significantly more difficult. So it's possible, but relocating with more than 2 pets gets pretty hairy. Should I say pretty furry? Sorry, that was a really bad joke. The third thing that I will mention, The third thing that I'll mention now is children. So children start school here at the age of 4. So if you're moving over with children who are 4 or just about to turn 4, it's probably best for you to actually work backwards and find the school before you find the house. Because here, unlike in the UK, for example, you won't be guaranteed a place at the school depending on the neighborhood. You won't be guaranteed a place at the school. It's only dependent on the availability of spaces in the school. So if you wanted to live near a school specifically, try and look for the school first, try and get accepted into the school first, and then look for your house. If the distance doesn't matter to you, then you wouldn't need to work backwards, but that's just something to think about. And now the fourth thing that I'll mention about that you should consider is, of course, your budget. So here in the Netherlands, we work by the 3 times rule, which essentially means that the value of your gross monthly income should be 3 times the month's rent of your property. So the reason for that is, well, the justification for that is 1/3 of your month's salary should go onto rent, 1/3 should go on utilities and living, so food and your utilities, and then 1/3 should be put on fun. So that's essentially what the kind of calculation is. A lot of landlords and agents do abide by this quite strictly, but we have noticed during the COVID pandemic that they've been a little bit more lax. People are starting to move out of rental properties a bit more, and so there are a few more open units, so they're being a little bit more relaxed, but it's still best to always go with that calculation in mind. Here are some of our top tips. If registering is not possible, it's a sublet and steer clear. I know I've mentioned this so many times, but I just really need to reinforce you need to be able to register at a property that you are living at. And the second one is written offers that are accepted are legally binding once they are accepted, and you can be fined for backing out. So the reason we'd like to mention this is to steer you away from putting an offer on 2 different properties, because if you get accepted and it's legally written down that you've been accepted to both and you pull out, the chances are you'd have a fine for pulling out of one of them, and this fine can amount to the value of 1 month's rent of that property. So put an offer on 1 flat at a time. I know it's hard to always do that because you don't want to miss out on anything, but it's better to not have the fine, in my opinion. And yeah, it's just quite difficult to get out of. A third one is landlords cannot simply evict you and know your rights. So like I mentioned before, it's very hard to be evicted. If you have any questions, though, you can always reach out to us. I know it's case dependent, of course, but it's very difficult to be evicted here unless you have a huge breach of contract. When it comes to repairs in your rental home, any minor repairs, so anything that's up to 100, tends to be the tenant's responsibility, that's the word, and anything upwards of 100 would be up to the landlord. Now, of course, if it's upward of 100, but then directly caused by you, say, for example, if you broke a window, that would be your responsibility. But then if the boiler broke down and by no fault of your own, that would be the landlord's responsibility. But any repairs up to 100 euros are normally the tenant's responsibility. Another thing that I'd like to mention is rent can be increased yearly if mentioned in the contract. Most increases are regulated and linked to inflation. So this is normally about 1%. Now it's good to make sure that this is in your contract, or, well, it's good to know whether it's in your contract or not, because if it's not in your contract and they try and increase your rent, you need to say, no, that's not in the contract, you can't do that, and you should absolutely push back on it. Whereas if it is in your contract, then you've got to pay it. That's just good to know. We would also recommend getting out liability insurance, home contents insurance, and legal insurance. I would mainly recommend 100% to get the liability insurance. It's about €3 a month per person, and it will cover you for any damage that is done, I think, up to, it's something ridiculous, like up to €1 million. So even if, so for example, if you were cycling down and you hit a car and dented it, hit a dented parked car, the liability insurance would cover that. And it's only €3 a month, so it's better safe than sorry. We would really recommend you get that. You can get that from your banks, you can get it from HEMA. It's very, very available everywhere. And the final thing that I'd like to mention is makelaars. We call them makelaars here. That's the Dutch word for real estate agents. They shouldn't be charging you a fee unless you specifically asked for their help. So watch out for this, because you can claim it back. And occasionally you might even get makelaars saying, oh, you need to pay money to even view the house. Don't do it. They can't do that. Know that you should only be paying someone if you've specifically asked for their help. And going to a viewing is not asking for their help. It's simply asking to go for a viewing before you actually want to put an offer on a property. So make sure to not get tripped up by that. Here are some useful links for you to think about. So the municipality in Dutch is called the gemeente. This is where you would register your address, and this is where you pay your taxes. I know it's not fun, but it's necessary. There's in Amsterdam, which is where an immigration desk, and where you can register and get your BSN number. So the BSN number is essentially your social security number, and without your BSN number, it's very difficult to open up banks. It's very difficult to well, you can't get on the payroll. You essentially can't live properly without a BSN number. So make sure that you can do that. The IND is the immigration department. And Woon is a non-profit. Woon is a website where you can go and ask any questions about your rights, about tenants' rights and complaints, or anything like that about renting. And they get back to you very quickly. Like I said, it is a non-profit. They're literally here to help you. So Woon is a good one to think about as well. Now, the topic of the year, well, year and a half now almost. No, just a year. I've got no more concept of time. But the topic of the year, renting during coronavirus. So before we'd be able to have big group viewings, of course, that is no longer possible. So viewings can be done in person or in video, and group viewings should not be taking place. I have gone to a couple viewings where they were hosting group viewings, but then me and my client decided to hang back until everyone else kind of went out. So they're not, like, the agent's not necessarily going to get in trouble, but they shouldn't be doing group viewings. Negotiating is possible on the higher end properties. So you might get some properties that are 2,500 euros a month and up. Those are obviously not going as quickly as they used to. So you can negotiate, but it wouldn't be you wouldn't be able to negotiate, say, for 1,500. It would probably be about 225. So still room to negotiate, but it wouldn't be that significant. Now, competition is still high on the properties under 1,400, so not much has changed on the market when it comes to those price departments, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is. Also, it's good to watch out for short-term rental contracts, and of course, to make sure you can register. You might have some people who are wanting to go home, for example, during this time, and then wanting to come back within 6 months, so are trying to rent out their property for 6 months just to see their family. Which of course makes sense, but again, that could be a subletting situation. So just make sure you can register. And then if you're having financial trouble, just talk to your landlord. Landlords are people too, and communication is key. So if you've got any questions or concerns about being able to pay rent, or if you can maybe figure out a payment plan, just talk to your landlord, and most of the time they'll be ready to help you out. I'm going to quickly walk you through some of our packages, well, the 3 packages that we would provide on the rental side. So we'll start off with the basic package. This is a total of 599 euros. That's including tax already. And for this one, we would request a 99 euro deposit, which is deducted from the final cost at the end. So the total package is 599. And with this, you would have an intake with a personal rental manager, who will then figure out the criteria that you'd like, answer any questions that you might have about the local housing market. And then you would always have access to this rental manager. So any questions you have along the way, whether it's process or just advice, you can ask them anything that you'd like to know or that you feel like you'd like some support in. We'll also give you our guides and checklists as well. So this would include a viewing checklist, for example, a check-in checklist, things to look out for, things to be wary of. And then once you found a property that you would like yourself, we would submit that offer for you. We'd build a little portfolio on you as well to send to the agent so that you seem more like a person rather than a number, which most landlords really prefer. And then we'll also review your contract for you, make sure that it's all legal and as it should be. And then we'll also set up your utilities for you. So that would be gas, water, and electrics, TV, and internet. So that's the basic package. Now the smart package includes all of that. But then as well as that, we would do a search on your behalf based on your criteria that you would like. And then from there, we'd share the search sheet with you. from which you can decide which houses you would like to view, or if you think we've missed the mark completely, you can rejig your criteria and we'll do another search for you based on that criteria. And then once you found a property that you would like to view, you can let us know and we would schedule that viewing for you. We wouldn't attend the viewing with you, but we would give you, again, guides and checklists so you know exactly what to ask, exactly what to look out for, so you still feel supported, but from afar. And then that is €999, including VAT. So that's the total price package. For the deposit, it is €199, which is then deducted from the final cost. So the total package cost is €999. And then moving on to the complete it's got everything the smart package has to offer, apart from we would join you. So we join you on the viewings, so we can talk to the agents, and we'd also join you on the check-in. Now, something that we've been doing a lot with coronavirus, during the coronavirus period, is because a lot of people are wanting to move directly in an apartment so that they don't have to do the quarantine before doing viewings, is we can do an entire virtual search and process for you. So if you want to remain abroad, then we can go on the viewings on your behalf and either do a video viewing, whether it be live or pre-recorded, that is your choice entirely. And then we'll also do the check-in on your behalf, make sure everything is in on the inventory, and make sure any blemishes on the walls or anything like that is written down so you aren't paying for it at the end of your tenancy. So that is a possibility to do a completely virtual package, but of course we do it in person as well, whatever you prefer. And that is €19.99, so €1,999, again, including tax. We do request a €299 deposit at the beginning of the process, but then that is deducted from the final invoice. So it is €1,999 for the entire package. Moving on. Now, we also do provide a buying service. So if you're torn between renting or buying, we do have a buying webinar similar to this one. It's free, but it's just with the buying team. And this is on the 8th of April. You can get the tickets from Eventbrite. And it's on our website and it's also on our Facebook page. So feel free to have a look if you're torn between renting or buying. And my name is Mary. I'm the Ops Officer. If you have any questions, please feel free to send an email to welcome@ehn.works. And I hope that was helpful. I know I spoke a lot and I spoke quite quickly and I gave you lots of information. But yeah, if you have any questions, please pop them down in the Q&A. At the moment, I've got no questions, so I'm happy with that, but I'll wait a couple of minutes just in case anyone wants to type anything. But if you do come up with any questions at the end of the session, after we finish this up, please feel free to either give us a call or send us an email. And like I said at the beginning of the session, this will be sent to you as well. So if you want to have a quick look back at any of the information I've given to you, that's also absolutely possible. All right, we've got a question from Quinn. Oh, and Senna and Quinn. Okay. Oh, I see. Quinn's got one question in two parts. If you moved into a furnished apartment, can you replace some items for your own? For example, replacing a couch or the mattress? Yes, you can. This is obviously, you would need to discuss this with your landlord, of course. So they might be able to, well, depending on the state of the sofa or the mattress, for example, if it really does need to be replaced, then you can put this in the offer and that you would like them to replace it. But if it's with your own, then maybe you could ask them to put their mattress and their sofa in storage. Of course, it's not guaranteed that they'll say yes to this, but it is a possibility. There's always no harm in asking. And Senna would like to know, hi, just curious, how common are buildings with elevators? In the city centre, the closer you get to the centre, the less common they become. So in the bigger high-rise buildings towards the Buitenveldert and near Zeeburg, then you'll see a lot more elevators in the big modern buildings. But actually in Amsterdam, they are quite rare. Well, in the centre of Amsterdam, they are quite rare because they're all of the houses are pretty old, but then just renovated. So I think the house that I'm currently in was built in 1902, but was renovated in 4 years ago. So yeah, it's an old shell with a newly renovated interior. Hi, Quinn. Can you touch on in-person viewings again? Is quarantining necessary? Of course, absolutely. So at this point, quarantining is necessary. It is 10 days, even if you've taken a negative COVID test before getting here, you do still need to quarantine, unfortunately. There is the possibility of getting a fast test, a speed test they call it. And what we found, so it's meant to be within 5 days that you get the results, and then after those 5 days, you can leave and not be in quarantine. But what we found is they have been overcrowded, and so they've ended up having to wait 10 days anyway. So quarantine is necessary, and always put in an extra 10 days. So in-person viewings, you would need to wait for the 10 days, and you would schedule them to be one-on-one with the agent, with the agent or the landlord. And if you're coming with your partner, that's of course fine. Some landlords are a bit more pernickety and might say they only want one person in at a time, but that is obviously at your discretion. You're so welcome, Quinn. And Mauricio, Mauricio's got a question. Do you think it's possible to sign a contract with minimum salary? So when it comes to salaries and contracts and getting accepted, like I said, it would need to abide by the 3 times rule. So if your salary does not cover 3 times worth the amount of rent, the chances are you won't get accepted. And it's I know it's really annoying. It is an annoying rule, but that's the general rule. So it depends on the salary, it depends on the rent. But if you abide by the 3 times rule, you should be fine. All right. With that, I bid you all good evening. Yeah, have a lovely evening or day, depending on your time zone. It's evening here. So yeah, thank you all for joining once again. And yes, have a great evening. Bye now.